Well, we've heard about the Butte Code, where you couldn't tell the stories. I lived under the Hearthstone Code. My wife and I bought a place called the Hearthstone Inn that we inherited, and it had some codes about ghosts. And the code was you weren't supposed to tell the ghost stories. Well, tonight, I'm bringing them out of the closet. I'm breaking those ghost stories. It was at 500 Cascade Avenue for about 30 years. My wife and I were the second owners of the inn. And the first owners were Ruth and Dot Williams, who many of you may remember in the community, and they converted the buildings. The buildings were the Bemis House. And the Bemises may be a familiar family name to many people in this town. They've done a little bit to support the arts and all sorts of things in this town. If you don't know who they are, how many people remember the paper bag? You know, the bottom of the paper bag has a very unique fold in it. Or the bottom of a sack of flour. Have you ever looked at it and noticed that it's square and has a very unique fold? Well, you can thank that fold for all the things that the Bemis money donated in Colorado Springs, because that is the Bemis patent. They invented the fold on the bottom of the paper bag, and they sold it to their cousins, the Pillsburys. They're actually intermarried. They also invented the cloth sack that was it was sewn only on the bottom and the top. There was no side seam. It was made like a round sock. They also created that. And the Bemis wealth came to Colorado Springs because of tuberculosis and health. And they built a mansion on the 500 block of North Cascade. And they donated all sorts of money. The Bemis Hall at Colorado College was donated by the Bemis family. The first endowed musical chairs in the city of Colorado Springs, the Taylor chairs at Grace Episcopal Church and the organ at Grace Episcopal Church were donated by the Bemis family, and money to keep it perpetually in tune was given to the city of Colorado Springs, and the city of Colorado Springs actually owns the organ at the church, and they're required to keep it up. So that was the founding of our arts programs in the Colorado Springs area, led to the orchestra. They also, very innovative idea was the Colorado Springs Day Nursery was overseen and built. They're actually having a charity event tonight to raise money for that. And it was the idea that young children could have not only daycare, but infirmary in one place. And Mrs. Bemis was also one of the founders of the Colorado Springs Fine Arts Center, which is one of the only fine arts centers in the United States to have not only the physical arts, but the performing arts under one roof. And that was a very innovative idea when it was done. So lots of projects like that. And so the inn had a big historical legacy that comes from the Bemis family. And one of those legacies, which we didn't know when we bought it, was ghosts. So, you know, I was introduced as a college professor, which by trade makes me a skeptic. Now, there are worse skeptics. I think they're called reporters. Lawyers, maybe? I don't know who else, you know? Judges? I don't know. What do you think? I know we have one or two in the room. But I was a quantitative kind of person. Prove it to me. So this is a bit of a story of a skeptic. So my introduction to ghosts, or my wife and I's introductions to ghosts, was originally not at the Hearthstone Inn, but on a trip from Colorado Springs that would bring us to San Francisco, California for my cousin's wedding. And actually there were three of us on board, but one of us wasn't born yet. It was my son. My wife was still pregnant with him. And we were traveling cross country, and we had seen some beautiful places like Zion National Park. And we made the mistake on our itinerary of going to Las Vegas after these lovely natural landscapes. Not good itinerary planning. After one night in Las Vegas, we just needed to get out of Dodge. It just felt wrong. So we headed to Yosemite, but we were a little tired, and we made it partway across the Nevada desert to a lovely little town called Tonopah, Nevada. I'm sure most of you have been there on vacation, right? Tonopah can be only described as a gold mining ghost town. I mean, there's not a lot in Tonopah, trust me. What there is in Tonopah is something you've probably heard of, and that's called Area 51. More people have probably heard of Area 51 than Tonopah, right? Tonopah sits on the south side of Area 51, which is an Air Force testing area. It's also been featured in many films about UFOs that various actors and companies have done. And Tonopah sits right on the edge. Well, we were tired and we stopped in Tonopah, Nevada, and we pulled up to a lovely old Victorian stone hotel called the Mizpah Hotel and asked if they had any rooms for the night because we just couldn't make Yosemite. We were too tired. And they said, yes, we have one room left tonight. I said, great, we'll take it. And he said, well, I have to tell you just one thing. It's haunted. So we looked at each other, shrugged our shoulders, and said, we'll take it. Fine, whatever, it's haunted. So we took the room. As I said, we were tired, so, we figured out dinner and went to bed. And it's about 2 o'clock in the morning, and I feel this shoulder nudging me in the arm, elbow rather, nudging me in the arm, going, did you leave the water on in the bathroom? I was like, I haven't been out of bed. But sure enough, the water in the bathroom was running at full force. I could hear it from the bed. Of course, I was elected to get up and go shut it off. Being a married man of a number of years, I knew I had lost the election. So I got up and went to go shut off the water. And sure enough, when I got to the bathroom, the water was running full force. I shut it off. And I came back to the bed. Of course, being the, intelligent person that I was, I had turned on the light on the way to the bathroom so that I wouldn't have to walk all the way across the room in the dark. And I came back to the bed and kind of sat down on the bed, scratching my head, going, why is the water on in the bathroom? And we're sitting there on the bed with the light on, and this is an old historic hotel, and you may have seen these kind of lights before. They're the kind of lights that used to be gas lamps, and the glass globes would face up, and there would be like, a little Coleman camping lantern kind of thing there that would light 4 different gas lamps in a chandelier. Well, when they converted them to electricity, they turned the glass the other way and put light bulbs in and strung electricity through the old gas pipes, which is actually where the invention of conduit came from. If you run the cord up an old pipe, it is better than if you, especially cloth, the original electric. So conduits came from the safety that was found in running it through old gas lines. Well, this was one of those hotels where they'd run the electricity through the old gas lines. And the lamp was still there. There were 4 globes, each facing down. And I'm not normally a person who gets scared or, is particularly nervous by design. I'm a, pretty easygoing person. But we were sitting on this bed looking up at this lamp, and first, one light moves. Then the one across from it moves. Then the one over here moves. The other ones are all still. Then the 4th one moves. And we look at each other, without a lot of conversation, kind of concluding, do you see what I see? And we both saw it and had cross-confirmation, so we couldn't be skeptical because we weren't the only ones seeing it. And then we shut it out and went to bed. And a few hours later, the water was running again. And this time, without asking, I just knew I was elected and got up and shut it off. And once again, the light moved, and once again, we turned it off, and once again, we went to bed. And somehow we made it to morning, unscathed. And we came downstairs and paid our bill and, signed the check and everything, and asked a question. Have you gotten complaints about this room before? And they confessed that they had. And they told us a couple stories. One, remember Area 51? They told us that Area 51 was right nearby, and it could be missile testing, causes strange vibrations. I was like, yeah, strange vibrations. The whole damn building would have moved. The whole light would have moved, not one globe at a time. They also gave a second excuse, something about San Andreas fault and earthquakes, and we shook our head and said, no, same problem. They said, well, there's the third reason. And I said, what's that? And they said, it's haunted. There was a murder there 100 years ago. There was a love triangle, and the wife found out, and the husband got killed on the 4th floor. And the other lover, I guess, was upset, and the mistress or wife or the second part of the love triangle got killed on the 3rd floor. Well, we were staying in the murdered husband's room, and apparently he still visits. So that was our first encounter with ghosts until we bought the Hearthstone Inn. So we went from 1988 in Tonopah, Nevada to the year 1999. About 11 years later, we bought the Hearthstone Inn. And at first we, heard some rumors about ghosts from housekeepers and things like that. Didn't have a lot of experiences. But then one night in about the year 2000, we had a major lightning strike. There was a tree in the corner of the yard, big old tree, had been there a long time. It was such a large lightning strike that about a 20-foot piece of branch off of that tree ended up in the center of the intersection at Cascade and St. Vrain, and we had lots of electrical damage like computer systems, telephone systems, et cetera, to the building. But we had an even bigger problem. It seemed to have woken up the ghosts, even more than they were before. And the kinds of things that started happening is, in one particular room that was fairly close to the lightning strike, on the third floor of the building closest to the lightning strike, in the Bemis house, which was the old servants' quarters of the building, there was a stairwell that went up the front, a formal staircase, and then another stairwell that went up the back, a servants' staircase. And this room was right next to the servants' staircase. We would put people in this room, and, well, I guess it's not an inn anymore, I can tell you. It's Peak View was the name of the room. And, our helpful innkeepers and front desk people would put people in this room, and sometimes about 5 minutes later, they would come down and say, "Can I have another room?" And we were like, "Yeah, sure, is there a problem?" "Uh-huh." And, graciously, we would give them another room, usually in the other building. There were two Victorian mansions that were connected in the middle by the old carriage house of one building. So the second building was a tuberculosis sanatorium, a little less haunted. And people had just died there for a few years. The morgue was in the basement. So we'd put them in the less haunted building to be nice, because it was further away from the lightning strike. Well, after a couple times of this happening and people saying things were moving in the room, strange light, they were creeped out, whatever else, whatever excuses they get, finally we started asking direct questions like, "What did you experience?" Sometimes we had some hints, and the hints were corroborated with the stories that we would hear. They would say, "Well, there was a mirror and it was on the wall and it floated by itself to the floor." And we were like, "Mm-hmm." And, let me just back up for a second. As an innkeeper, when this starts to happen, there are two things you have to ask. One, is there a problem with my inn? And the natural second question, is there a problem with my guest? You choose. But when it's your building, you have to ask the question. So we would ask, and we always said we can neither confirm nor deny the existence of ghosts in our building, because that's what our lawyer said to say. But, Lindsay Fisher, by the way, a great attorney. But we'd go up to the room, and sure enough, this mirror had been hanging on the wall at about the place where a mirror should hang so that you could see yourself in the mirror. But the mirror wasn't there. The mirror was laying next to the bed. And we'd pick it up. What would you expect that mirror to be if it was laying on the floor and not on the hook on the wall? Yeah, it was never broken. It was always fine. And we always hung it back up. We should have learned from that, because it kept happening to different people at different times, months apart from each other. It happened over and over again. And that was, some of the kinds of things that would happen. And then when we started talking about it, we literally let this stuff out in the open. We empowered employees, some of whom had been there for decades, longer than we had owned, way longer than we'd owned the inn, to tell the stories that they'd experienced. And they told us over the years that, people had quit because they were freaked out because of experiencing these things. They'd heard voices in the basement, light in the attic, changes in temperature. Everything you've ever heard on a ghost hunting, TV show, they told us. I mean, even funny things like, disbelieving waiters would find their pen, would leave their pocket, and they would look around for it, and they couldn't find it, and it was hanging from the curtain 10 feet in the air, above their... This particular waiter was short. He was about 5'2", and the ghost would relocate his pen to the top of the curtain. I mean, they had a sense of humor about it. They would push glasses off of shelves, and, they would move doors, particularly doors that had metal handles or glass handles. It seemed that metal they could connect to better. But, story after story we got over time. And then, I know for those of you in the internet business, you probably think you were in the first 24/7 business, right? You invented it, right? Wrong. Innkeepers did 3,000 years ago. When you have guests 24 hours a day in your hotel, it's a 24/7 business. So somebody's always got to be there. And one night a week, when I would give the overnight innkeeper the night off, I was the overnight innkeeper. So I would stay there, not much. I mean, I would, close the building and make sure all the doors were locked and, everything was as it should be and all the guests were checked in. And, I would take a phone and go downstairs, and I would actually sleep with the emergency phone next to me. And the place that I slept was the old tuberculosis nurses caretaker apartment, which was in the basement. The walls of the inn are about 3 feet thick. They're hand-hewn stone that came from good old Canyon City prison system just to our south. Well, I don't know about you, but I can't hear very well normally through a 3-foot stone wall. But this particular night when I was overnight innkeeping, I heard a cinder block, or what sounded like a cinder block moving across asphalt. It's a very distinct noise, especially when you were closing up the inn and you took that cinder block and moved it so that it held the gate closed in a particular part of the back parking lot area. So I was very familiar with that sound. It was something I recognized, and I heard it in what I thought was a dream. And right from where I heard it, with my, obviously, eyes closed, I sensed an object in the darkness. Now, if you close your eyes, most of us will see, an indication of the light or, something in your vision, even when your eyes are closed. What I sensed with my eyes closed was a dark object that was darker than the darkness around it. And it was coming from approximately where that cinder block would have been, which was one building away, approximately 150 yards from where I was sleeping. From where that noise happened, which doesn't make sense, I couldn't have heard it. I mean, in normal waking state, you would never have heard something that far away through that many walls and buildings. The object moved from that spot directly in a straight line through all the buildings, through all the walls, through the stone, and right to the bed that I was sleeping in. I didn't know that ghosts were lovers, but apparently this one was, because it cuddled up next to me and we were spooning. This was not what I was expecting when I went to bed. Now, this is supposed to be a scary story, so stop laughing. I don't know about you, but, fortunately I'd gone to the bathroom before I went to bed, so I didn't lose anything when this happened, but I was scared. This was a strange energy that was laying behind me, and when I opened my eyes, the scene was exactly the same in my waking state with my eye open as it was with my eyes closed. I know this because I opened and closed my eyes a number of times just to test. Repeating something from The Wizard of Oz. I don't believe in spooks. I don't believe in spooks. But I was experiencing it, and it was definitely there. And while it didn't speak in normal sentences or words like I'm doing now, it certainly communicated the thought that I'm okay with you and your family being in this building and being the innkeepers, if you're okay with us being here. It was a very distinct message. It was like telepathy, but it was very clear. And I don't know if that object stayed behind me spooning for 5 seconds, 5 minutes, or 5 hours. I have no concept of time. I just know that I was frozen other than my ability to open and close my eyes. And then it floated back right to the gate, moved the cinder block again, and dissipated. And I got up and sat in the bed with my head in my hands going, what just happened? For a couple of minutes, regained my composure. I didn't pay my wife back for the water, you get up and shut off the water thing. I waited till morning to tell her the story. I didn't call her at 3 in the morning or whenever this happened, but I did get up and go outside and walk around the building. And sure enough, that gate that I'd closed at midnight was wide open, and the cinder block had moved 3 feet. The exact noise that I heard had really happened. Well, I shut the gate again, went back to sleep. It took me a little while to fall back asleep, I'll be honest. And I had my own personal experience and my own ghost story as a result of that. Over the years, I collected many ghost stories from many customers. They were all none quite as intense as the one I just showed you. Some may be more intense, depending on whether you experienced them or just heard about them. But what happened is the story started getting out, and then we started doing murder mysteries and talking about it a little more openly. And then one day I got a phone call from ghost hunters. This was about 2003, and you get a phone call from somebody who said, we've heard your inn is haunted and we'd like to do some ghost hunting. And I said, okay, how much is this going to cost me? And they said, no, nothing, we'd like to come for free. So I said, really, what are you going to do? And I said, well, we bring all these scientific instruments and tape recorders and EVP and all the stuff you've seen on TV. And they did this official ghost hunting. I said, okay, well, how do you feel about if I invite the press? And they said, oh yeah, we're fine with that. I was like, really? So we got some TV stations and some radio stations from, Boulder, Colorado Springs, Denver to come, and we set up a dinner, and we told a little bit longer, but some of the history that I just told you about the inn, about the Bemis family and some of the things in the building. We didn't really tell them any of the ghost stories. And then what we said is, okay, you have free reign. You can go anywhere you want in the building, to the attic, to the basement, to either of the two mansions, and explore this 12,000 square feet of, Victorian bed and breakfast and all 29 bathrooms and, every room, and you go anywhere you want. But the press is going to be following you. And they did. And they found, their instruments made noises in all the places that the ghost stories came from. But we didn't tell them where the ghost stories came from. So when they got up to peak view, their instruments went crazy. And when they got on the back stairway, everything happened exactly where our employees and our guests had said it would happen. And one thing that happened on one of the ghost hunts that really came to fruition for a lot of people was this corroboration, not only between guest to guest, telling the same stories, having the same experiences, but having scientific instruments corroborate what you might call a psychic phenomenon. I know spirits go by a lot of names. In the Bible, they're spirits, they're angels. So, but if you use the wrong word, then, I know people get upset. Ghosts sometimes are, pushed over to the side of evil spirits and the devil. But the truth is, they're really all the same thing. It's a phenomenon that's not human, that's of a spiritual nature that's around us. And we can see things on scientific instruments like changes in temperature. And infrared cameras are sensitive to them. And we could take tape recordings and speed them up and slow them down and pick up the voices that were going on. So we let them do all of these things. And one of the things that happened, one of the ghost hunters that came, he was, I want to say, close to 7 feet tall. Maybe he was 6'11". He was not short. And he was the one with the infrared camera. And he was holding it up in the air and had one of these flip screens on it. And the ghost hunters had brought with them some people that were very sensitive. Some of you might call them psychics or other titles like that. But they were very sensitive naturally, had very good vision for this kind of thing. Unlike most of us, they could see these things. And one of the psychics was describing an apparition that was forming in the corner of the room during a ghost hunt. And we were standing in the hallway and the camera was pointed into the doorway of one of the rooms. That was one of the particularly haunted rooms. In fact, during the construction of the inn, we found out that a note had been found behind the old sink in the wall that had been written in the early 1900s from a tuberculosis patient who'd stayed in the room, and it talked of their suffering in that hospital. And that was the room we were looking at. And she's describing this apparition for me, and I'm looking, in the corner of the room, and I can't see a thing. And, she's describing what's happening, and I look up at the infrared camera, and exactly what she is describing is appearing on the screen. And I look down into the room, and I can't see it. And I look up at the screen, and I see exactly what she's describing. There's a woman forming on the screen. And I'm like, that's a little more proof than I was expecting. It startled me a little bit because it was just so obvious right there that, it was as if I was blind and suddenly, nobody knew what was wrong with me until I put on this pair of glasses, and all of a sudden everything was clear. And that's what that infrared camera did. It had that impact. And I know that some people can see this better than others. I mean, I felt and experienced something in a dreamlike state, but I never saw apparitions floating around the inn like that, but I did on that infrared camera. And then in those rooms, right next door was another room. We had some people who actually, to this day, are ghost hunters. And their first experiences were at the Hearthstone Inn at one of our ghost hunting events. Because this was popular, we did it a few more times over time. And they were in a room, and the woman at night experienced a ghost coming through the wall and across the bed. And when she got up the next morning, she told one of our innkeepers the story, who also related to my wife, and the husband said he wanted to experience it, so they stayed another night in the inn, and the second night, he experienced the exact same thing. We researched that particular room, and we found that exactly where they were talking about in the architectural drawings, which would have been the head of the bed, in the architectural drawings, right where she walked through, used to be a doorway. And we went up and we looked at the wall, and in the wallpaper we could see the ghost frame, and I probably bad choice of words, but you could see the frame of the door. It was still there a little bit in the wallpaper. So what we had was over and over again, we had situations where the facts of history, the ghosts in the other building, we found out that where that particularly haunted place was, there had been a suicide where somebody hung themselves from, when it was apartments in the history of the building, had hung themselves there. So a lot of times we could find corroboration between different people's stories, between historical facts, architectural realities of the history of the building, and the ghost stories. And we found that they're actually all interconnected. So that was our journey from being a skeptic to being a believer in ghosts. You decide.